Sommeren seconden is voor de zinkelkoor. Zovet zet naar boven met een zinkelwoorden moe. Zinkelkoor, samen met de dag de lang door zachte kalde koor. Zullen werd het boeken, werd het zoer is zinkelkoor. Koe, zin zingen, koe, de singuläre oor. Sommeren seconden is, sommeren seconden is, sommeren seconden is.
Yeah, I'm Simon Thomson. I am the senior lecturer in medieval English at Düsseldorf, and I am from the UK. As you can probably hear in my voice, from different parts of the UK. I'm from Birmingham originally, but I lived in Oxford and London as well. The first time I encountered actual medieval English language was during my undergraduate degree. It was a compulsory part of my first year studies, and I hated it with a passion. It was by far my least favourite part of my first year study, partly because of the way it was taught, and partly because I found it really just foreign and strange. Like I wanted to study English because I was excited by literature and how it worked and how it made me feel and the kind of thoughts it generated in me. And studying Old English, which is where we started, felt really boring and slow and tedious and irrelevant. So it was very much not love at first sight. I first encountered medieval English literature, though, at a much earlier age, initially through Tolkien, like many early medievalists, through Tolkien's work, and then finding out about his scholarship, and then through a woman called Rosemary Sutcliffe, who I imagine is not that well known in Germany, but she wrote children's books quite a long time ago, including quite a lot of kind of historical fiction. And there's a version of Beowulf that she wrote that I absolutely adored when I was a kid. So that kind of sat alongside Greek legends and Roman legends that I read when I was little. So the kind of world excited me and interested me, but the language and the study of it turned me cold and unhappy when I studied it at undergraduate level. So what I've noticed about my kind of academic career, or my Lebenslauf, I suppose, rather than my career, is that the thing that I choose to study at each juncture is usually the thing that I found hardest or least pleasant in the previous period. So I'm continually making life as hard as possible for myself. So when it came to the moment where I had to decide what to write my BA thesis, or the equivalent of my BA thesis on, I chose to write it about early medieval literature because that was the bit that I'd done worst at so far, which wasn't a conscious choice. That was just the kind of the nut that I felt I wanted to crack. And I did quite badly in that, but I got very wrapped up in Beowulf and the way it was written and the way it worked. And it was very much that earlier medieval literature that really grabbed me then. And more or less from the ends of my second year, or the fourth semester of my undergraduate degree, I knew that medieval literature, specifically Old English literature, was the thing that I wanted to work on. So it was sort of a slow building love, but by the time I was 22, it was definitely what I wanted to spend the rest of my life working with. That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that makes it interesting for me is that as I recognise that desire in myself to always try to engage with the thing that I found hardest in the previous period, medieval literature, maybe not uniquely, but certainly medieval literature has this capacity where there is always something else to do. There's always something that you're not very good at. So once I'd kind of finished studying Old English literature, then I was interested in manuscripts, which I was really very poor at during my masters. And once I was comfortable with them, then I moved on to working on Latin, which I was incredibly poor at during my PhD. And once I've finished with that, then I moved on to kind of archaeology and art history, which I have no skill at all with. So when you're studying medieval literature, more so, I think, than with other literary fields, there's always something kind of more exciting or more difficult, that's always something that you haven't got to grips with. So maybe it's not the kind of that feeling of having grasped it, having been so difficult to start off with, but more the feeling that it's always ungraspable, that it's always difficult, that it's always challenging, that it always kind of keeps me on my back feet. Is probably what I like about it. So that experience of not liking it and feeling bad at it seems to be what I'm chasing all the time. Having said that, that kind of early experience of studying Old English particularly really stays with me. And I don't think I've found a way to solve this yet, but that's something that kind of really kind of motors my teaching, is recognizing and remembering that it's very easy for people to feel turned off medieval literature, because the initial experience of encountering it can be so difficult and so challenging. So my intention generally in teaching is to try to avoid that, to try to make it feel more like it's, you know, alive and natural, and part of literary studies and linguistic studies more broadly, rather than a strange separate appendix to it. So I'm trying, I suppose, to prevent other people going down the path that I went down, because I feel it was quite unproductive. But maybe, as you suggest, maybe is exactly that experience that's that turned me onto it. I'm not sure. I didn't really answer the question, but it's a really good question.
I think it sort of answered it. Like, basically, you find the challenge interesting, and that is what kept you going. So I feel like you answered it, maybe in a roundabout way,
Yeah,
but you answered it. Thank you.
My bachelor degree was English language and literature. So a bachelor in English language and literature. In the UK, it's more normal to do single honours degrees, so it was just English, effectively. So yeah, that was it. And then there were various different parts of it. It was a very traditional degree that worked through the different phases of English language and literature historically, so starting from the beginning and moving onwards. So that first encounter was therefore with Old English rather than Middle English. And we were first set to the task of translating Alfred Jeansham's preface to Genesis, which actually is quite an interesting text, I now think. But I think when you can confront 18-year-olds who are excited about being at university with a text that talks about which book of the Bible is most like the tail of a horse and which book of the Bible is most like the left eye, you just think, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through the hell of working out what's going on here in order to read this nonsense? So that was it was like a bucket of cold sick in your face. So when we got to Middle English, it felt more familiar. Like Gawain and the Green Knight and Chaucer, especially Troilus and Crusade, felt like a kind of more familiar mode of storytelling. So I was more comfortable with that, and we did less linguistic study of it. But I never really liked it. I've never really got on board with Middle English. There are very few Middle English texts that really grab me and excite me and thrill me. I enjoy quite a lot of them, but I enjoy quite a lot of different texts and stories. So that certainly didn't excite me or stay with me. There are other parts of my degree that stay with me as well as Old English, but definitely Old English was the thing that I loved, and Middle English was just one of those things that you have to study. There was actually quite a big break between my my bachelor's and my master's degree, which, so in the UK it's less normal. Sorry, no, that's not quite true. In the UK, it's less assumed that having done a BA, you will go straight on to do an MA. It's more of a specific choice to do a master's for people who are interested in the academic side of it. And I knew that I really wanted to do a master's. So like a lot of kids who were kind of good at school, when I was at school, I imagined that I'd become a teacher. And then when I went to university, I was like, oh no, fuck teaching, I want to be a university teacher. That's obviously the job that I want. That looks incredible. So more or less from Christmas at the end of my first term in university, I knew that was what I wanted to do, and the kind of work that I wanted to do. But I didn't have the money to, and it's very expensive to go to university in the UK, and it's more expensive now than it was then. But I just couldn't afford it. I had huge debts from doing my undergraduate degree. I needed to get a job, so doing anything else just wasn't an option. So I trained to be a teacher, which is relatively well supported in the UK. Kind of a you don't incur more debt by doing that course, or you didn't then. And then I went on to be a classroom teacher for several years, and then did various other jobs before eventually being in a position where I could go back and start doing a master's part-time while still working full-time in order to pay for it. So the plan from the time that I finished my undergraduate degree was quite a loose one of eventually I want to try doing more academic work, and if possible, I would like to have an academic career. But it took quite a long time to realise that plan effectively. So by the time I was doing my masters, I had another career in effect in kind of progress, and my medieval studies were very much kind of on the side of that. They were what I did when my friends were all going out drinking or going to the theatre or whatever. And And at the weekend, when my wife was meeting up with our families, I would be in the library and working and reading and that kind of stuff. And my PhD was very similar. I worked and did my PhD kind of around work. So yeah, so the career was a hope, kind of hope in the distance and a possibility, but the doing of it, the study of it, the engaging with material was the exciting thing, was the thing that I did for fun, I suppose, which is why it's so awesome to have the job that I have, because the thing that I did for fun for years is now what I do for work. Yeah, pretty much. So so when I uh, so lots of things happened at the same kind of time that we got married, my wife and I, and we weren't. She wasn't my wife before, but after the marriage, she was my wife. So the person who would become my wife and I got married to each other. At the same time, I quit my teaching job because I got a place to study a master's part-time at UCL, which is University College London, one of the big London universities. And then I applied, as soon as I had the master's place, then I applied for a job that I would be able to do at the same time as doing the master's. But my intention was always to move on from the master's to the PhD. So I knew that this is what I was trying to do. This was me rolling the dice and seeing if I could do it or not, and then doing whatever work I had to around the side in order to enable that to happen. So through the master's, I suppose, I was thinking, what excites me, what interests me here. And it was a broad-ish medieval literature master's that led me very, very strongly down the kind of Old English and manuscripts line. So it was somebody who supervised me during my master's that I knew I wanted to supervise me for my PhD. There was one other person that I thought I might want to supervise me, who I never actually met. I just read his work and really liked it. But in the end, I was too cowardly to approach him. And the person who was part of my master's, Richard North at UCL, was willing to supervise me. So it was all straightforward. But there was a gap between those two things because my wife and I had always said that we would do a thing called VSO, which is living and working overseas somewhere in a so-called developing country, in a southern country, and this was the time to do it. That if I were going to move on to a PhD and then into an academic career, at that point we wouldn't be able to take a break, and it also worked with my wife's career as well. So at the end of my masters, we then took 2.5 years out to go and live and work in Nigeria. And while we were there, like towards the end of being there, that's when I applied for my PhD position and got it. But it was all sewn up. It was fairly clear halfway through my masters that the person I wanted to supervise me would supervise me. So it was just a case of him waiting till I was back, till I joined the course. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, so yeah, it wasn't a paid position. There's lots of different ways to do a PhD, especially in the UK. So by far the most normal model in Germany is to have a paid position within a department and do the PhD with it. Another model within Germany would be to get funding from a third-party organisation that effectively pays for you to be a member of the department and do PhD. And those models do exist in the UK, but they're quite rare. So the funding model is the most common one. So where somebody gets funding from a national organisation or from university to do their PhD. And I suppose it would have been possible for me to pursue that kind of line, but I had such a weird CV by then that most funding organisations aren't that keen on funding somebody who's done this job and that job, and it's all been a bit part-time and that kind of stuff. They want to see that someone's done things consistently, to be sure that they'll follow through. So I just didn't really try with that. I applied to one thing and didn't get it, and didn't really try after that. So then, like my masters, the question was, could I work at the same time as doing it, and would that be enough money to pay for the course fees and the other stuff to go with it? And it was. I was really lucky. I got an incredibly good job. Still working in Nigeria effectively as a consultant, paid an embarrassing sum of money to do work, which meant that it was relatively straightforward to cover the costs of things, and also to do things like, because I was mostly working abroad but notionally doing my PhD in London, that meant that I couldn't use libraries as much as I normally would. So, but because I was well paid, I was able to buy books and that kind of stuff in order to read them on planes. So most of my PhD was done on planes and on trains and in long car rides into the desert in the north of Nigeria, while I typed things and read things, which is pretty awesome. It was a really cool experience. And it all just worked out really, really well, basically. I was very lucky. That was one of the good things about my undergraduate experience, was that the way it was not the way it was assessed, but the way it was taught. You had to write a lot. So most weeks you had to write at least 2 essays, and often you had to write more than that. So you're just writing all the time. So the fear of writing just goes, and you haven't got time to sit there and try and plan it out. You're just writing because, like, shit, I've got to write this one because before lunchtime I've got to write another one. And that's probably not very good for the lecturers who have to read all this garbage that students produce when they're writing frantically. But it also takes that fear of writing away. So you just, if you need to write something, you just write it. You just get it written. And there's always time, like especially now. I didn't have a computer when I started my undergraduate degree, which feels unbelievable, doesn't it? But I didn't. So everything was handwritten. But now, like with computer stuff, you can always go back and change things later. So like getting something written is the most important thing, and so that didn't make it too difficult to do, to be like switching between mental worlds all the time and to be writing in really weird places. And actually, that's one of the things I really miss about COVID, that I used to get a lot of my best writing as a lecturer now done during my commute on trains. Like 40 minutes on a train, I find much more productive as writing time than time at my desk. For that kind of same kind of weird reason of getting into that headspace of, right, go on then, you've got this time, write. And then I start writing, and then I will always go back later and reorganize things and turn it into something sensible and structured and coherent. But that spontaneity of writing, that spontaneity of conversational writing, is really difficult to attain, I think, as a student. And it's really difficult to realize that that's what academic writing is, that it's not great works or books that are the final words on things. It's this continuing conversation. And so I think my training, accidental as it was really good for that, I think. So I think I'm probably most specialised in I'm most specialised in Old English manuscripts. Essentially, that's the thing that if I'm known for anything, that's what I'm known for. That's where I feel most comfortable, and it's easiest for me to write stuff. Mostly because that's what I focused on during my PhD, which I still haven't moved on from very much in terms of getting more comfortable with other things. But I'm a little bit, as I said, like with thinking about how I became a medievalist, I'm a little bit kind of a jack of all trades, as we'd say in the UK. Like I do various different things because I don't stay doing the same thing. So in some ways, the sensible thing for me to do would be to become a serious specialist on Old English poetic manuscripts, because that's what I worked on during my masters and to some extent during my PhD. So that's what I should stay doing, really. But I'm trying to become more of a specialist in medieval manuscript culture in Western Europe more broadly in the early medieval period. And because the vast majority of manuscripts in this period are in Latin, obviously, that means becoming more of a specialist in medieval Latin and medieval Latin manuscripts. And it also means engaging with the kind of material and political and social culture in places other than England. And obviously no one can be a specialist in all those different things because there's too much going on. But that's broadly where I imagine myself being, is European manuscript culture between 600 and 1200 is my kind of thing. But my more specialist area really is English literary culture and the kind of materials on which that's produced from around about 950 until around about 1050. That's my most specialised area, I suppose. And in particular, like my PhD and therefore my first book was on the Beowulf manuscript, Beowulf and the Beowulf manuscript. So that specific manuscript and the text that it contains are what I've published on the most and what I've kind of worked on and thought about the most. And they always feel like quite kind of safe spaces for me to be. Like if I'm teaching on one of the texts from that manuscript, I don't really have to work very hard. It's all just there, where some other things are harder work. Initially manuscripts because I'm bad at them, or I was bad at them. So during my masters, I was very bad at working with manuscripts, and it was a compulsory part of our masters to have an exam, and the exam was on paleography, the study of handwriting. There was no other examined component. Everything else was writing, was term papers, and for this exam, it was the most awful experience of my entire life. It was so embarrassing because I just couldn't do it. I went to the exam knowing that I couldn't do it. I couldn't read medieval writing. I couldn't talk about it at all. I had nothing. but it's an oral exam, and you're sat in this little room with two brilliant lecturers and professors, and they are trying to get you to say enough sensible things to pass this bloody exam, and I just couldn't. And they were guiding me through it bit by bit and saying, on that second line though, not that line, the line below that, yeah, the second line, that's right. The first letter, what's that first letter look like? Okay, well, don't worry about that. What about the second letter? Like they really were trying to get me to say enough, and eventually I said enough of it to pass, like enough for them to say that I passed. They were very generous, but it'd been a terrible experience, and I'd been sitting cross-legged, and I'd been sat there so long and been so tense that my foot had gone completely to sleep. So when I stood up to leave this excruciating exam, my foot just gave way under me, and I fell into the lap of my examiner, and kind of gripped at her skirts, and had to kind of drag myself out of the room limping. It was just the worst experience. When I told her about that a little while ago, when we went for a drink together, she didn't remember it at all, thank God, because it was just the worst experience of my life. So that experience with manuscripts made me want to conquer it. Like I don't want to feel defeated by something, so I wanted to work more with manuscripts. So that's probably the main kind of driver to work with them. But then, having started to work with them more closely, having got to know them, what really excites me about, there's so much that really excites me about working with manuscripts. One is that they're kind of physical and material, and so they kind of take us away from the world of the intellect and thinking that the body is different from the mind and that kind of thing. So I really like that kind of getting to grips with something that's an artifact that's real, that you can hold. That brings you also, I feel, much closer to the people who are working with these texts. So there's a tendency when we talk about medieval texts to try to connect with the author whose mind is like ours, and to ignore all the people who actually read the text in the middle and worked with it in the middle. Whereas when you're working with a manuscript, you're really physically and visually in touch with how people actually engage with text in this period, and that really excites me. And I really love just the weirdness of them, the oddities of them, because they're individual instantiations of texts rather than kind of perfected, smoothed out, like universally agreed versions of texts. There's odd problems and odd strangenesses and odd corrections and notes and scribbles and little marks and sketches that no one's noticed before. So you're really, it's like meeting a person rather than meeting a group of people. Like, you're really getting to know an individual. So it's that kind of sense of an infinite world of different realities in a manuscript that's fabulous. It's also, I think, a world that is really little understood, even within medieval studies. So during my masters, when I would ask questions like, but how was the manuscript made? Like, what happened first? Did you fold it first or cut it first? When did you do the line rulings? Nobody knows. We just don't know those things for so many manuscripts. So there's so much about manuscript culture that is unknown, and I find that really exciting and stimulating as well. Like, there's lots of questions to ask, lots of questions to answer. It's also in various different bits of medieval studies, and this happens within academia quite a lot. In various different fields of medieval studies, they're really contentious. Like, anybody who wants to say anything about Beowulf is going to get themselves into hot water. There are lots of places where people get very angry and very upset about specific ideas. And I find that quite overwhelming and intense, and I don't really want to get involved with any of that. So the manuscript feels to me like quite a safe place to stand, that if you're talking about the manuscript, you don't have to worry about the poet or the poem or the language or the original story or what things went on to mean. You're engaged with the study of a material artifact that's really there, and you can really point to it and hold it. So it feels like a more concrete, less abstruse, less horrible place to be. I also really like, sorry, going on its phrases because manuscripts are so awesome. I also really like the manuscripts engage the whole self in a way that texts don't. So texts are stimulating in lots of ways, and poetry especially is obviously stimulating in a kind of really physical way. But with a manuscript, you can look at it, you can think about the colours used and the layout and the shape and the space. You can think about the hands that corrected it and worked with it, the hands that created the parchment for it to be worked on, and the pictures to be looked at, as well as thinking about the language and how they're encoding it and how they're performed from, and the kind of intellectual ideas they contain. So they're wildly stimulating and wildly exciting. It's just the best. I can't honestly understand why anybody doesn't work with manuscripts. They're just the best thing. I haven't actually, and there's a workshop you can do at the University Library in Düsseldorf, where you look at and work with and play with some of the materials that were originally used. or like the ones that were originally used, which I really should do. I've sent students on, but I've never actually gone on myself. And there's various different centres of the book. There's one in Iowa where the people there are very generous with their time and ideas. And a couple of students of mine at Dusseldorf have relatives or have people who have done that kind of thing, mostly through the kind of medieval reenactment groups that are quite big here. So I've never done that. I'm a very bad artist, like as in I'm not an artist at all. I'm quite clumsy. I'm not really in control of my hands. So my handwriting is a real mess, and anything I try to produce visually is a real mess. So I think I would just absolutely destroy anything that I produce like that. My wife is doing a graphic design degree and playing a lot with kind of fonts and lettering, and I keep trying to bully her into studying medieval lettering and layouts more because I would like to do it, but I can't. So I want to make her do it, but she's resisting so far, very, very sensibly. What made it hard for me? I think partly that I'm not a good visual learner. Like that, I've had to really train that part of my mind and my brain a lot as I become a medievalist. So text and language I'm pretty comfortable with, and patterns and tables and different types of data representation. But looking at what's effectively an image and decoding it and seeing the different lines that are going on and which ones are meaningful and which ones aren't meaningful is just not something that I either innately had or not something that I was trained in when I was a kid or when I was a student. So being confronted suddenly with a page that's just covered in a mass of lines, I was just a bit overwhelmed by it. That's probably the main thing, is it? I mean, there are other differences, like I could make excuses. For example, in those days, it's not that long ago, but in those days, the best versions of manuscripts images we had were photocopies of facsimiles. So it's black and white pages produced on a fairly crappy photocopier from a book that is already a facsimile anyway. So the images are quite low in quality, which makes them harder to read. But obviously, my peers, other students who studied it with me, were fine with it. It's just me that wasn't. Yeah, I just really struggled to separate letters from one another. I think that's the thing that I found hardest, is I just couldn't read. I was, and in many ways, in like 15th, 16th century manuscripts, I still am illiterate. I just can't read them, which is probably mostly just a case of spending time with them, I think. Like when I first started working with 12th century North Italian manuscripts, I found them weirdly difficult to read. But there's nothing particularly hard about it. It's just that my eye wasn't used to the flicks and the curls, and therefore blurred letters into one another. So a combination of different things, I think, to do with that kind of that visual part of me being not very strong, to do with not being particularly trained in it. It maybe could have been made easier. Like I don't want to criticize my teachers because they're amazing, but when I work with students on manuscripts, I tend to give them each individual letter form and what it looks like, to try to give more of a sense of how you can piece apart a word. And I really struggled to get that when I first worked with manuscripts. But mostly, I think I just struggle with things that aren't in the flesh. So working with a manuscript when you're holding it is easy, really. Like you struggle to stop finding things to say. But working with an image of a manuscript, I think, is quite difficult. Yeah. That's not a great answer. It's a very good question, but I don't really know the answer to the question. And you're right, students will be interested. Yeah, I don't know. I was just crap at it. So sometimes you just crap at things. Yeah, so I finished my I took 3 years to do my PhD. I was working alongside it, like I said, and towards the end of it, I was starting to think, like, what next? That's quite a hard step to go from a PhD to a job of any kind. Much harder, I think, than the step from a master's to a PhD. Partly because the job market is really very limited in especially in humanities doctorates, because there's lots of people with those degrees and there aren't very many jobs for them. Also, though, because the jobs that there are available are quite crap or quite demanding, because there are so many people with PhDs or that are just finishing their PhDs. Employers can be quite mean to them, really very mean to them, and exploit them quite a lot. So the standard thing to do in the UK, which is not that dissimilar in Germany at the moment, is for somebody in my kind of position is to finish a PhD and then to get as many different teaching jobs as you can. So you're doing like a little bit of teaching here and a little bit of teaching there and a little bit of teaching there, and you construct this crazy work timetable where you charge from one lecture to another, which is what I was expecting to do effectively. The dream position to get after your PhD is a position on somebody else's project, like somebody's got some funding for a piece of work and they're prepared to employ you to be a part of it. Because that's slightly more kind of settled than that kind of jumping around. And it's more research focused than having to do all that teaching all the time, which is quite a lot. It's quite demanding especially after you come straight out of a research degree. And I didn't know, like with the funding thing, I suppose, I didn't really know where to look to find that kind of stuff. I'm very bad at networking, very bad at making contacts. So I didn't really know what was happening or where those things might be. So I had a difficult choice, effectively, that at the same time that I was handling my PhD, the organization that I was working for in Nigeria was expanding, and they offered me a really good job, which would have been really exciting in lots of ways. So I had the choice between either kind of committing to that and that becoming my career and the PhD being a thing that I had done kind of on the side from that, or quitting all of that so that I could stay in London and go around frantically different teaching jobs. And I had some teaching jobs that I was offered that I could have done that with no guarantee of a job in the future. And obviously I would then have rejected this company and no longer be working for them because I couldn't carry on working in Nigeria while also doing this teaching stuff. So I didn't really know what I was going to do about that, but I was probably inclining towards giving the teaching thing a go for a term and seeing what would happen, which would be for about 3 months or so. But then I saw a job, and I still can't remember. I've been trying to remember how I saw it advertised. I think it was like an email mailing list or something. Nowadays it would be on Twitter, but it's so long ago that it wasn't really on Twitter then. That was in Germany, that was in Bochum, and another part of the challenge of these early career jobs is that there's an expectation that somebody who's early in their career will move around really freely. And as it happens, we didn't have children, and as it happened, my wife's job would have worked very well with us moving around. So we were quite free to say, yeah, we could move at a moment's notice to the Netherlands or Germany or France or Italy or even the North America, wherever it came up. So I was looking anywhere for any kind of job. And I saw the one in Bochum and applied for it and got it. And so before actually my PhD was awarded, I was working and teaching in Bochum. And yeah, there we go. That was that. And then after a few years there, I'd had contacts with Junior Professor Edlich Muth on some publishing projects and through a regular conference that's held here in Germany. So we sort of knew each other. And she knew she had this job coming up and invited me to apply for it, and I did, and I got this. So yeah, so I was really lucky, effectively, to kind of fall from one thing to the other. Like I think, I don't know because I don't really know how these things work, but I think that I wouldn't have got the job in Bochum if the professor who gave it to me hadn't, a very long time ago, worked with my supervisor for my PhD. So I think the kind of technically it's a reference system, but that system of people knowing each other matters a lot in academia, a lot more than it should. And I think I wouldn't have got the job in Dusseldorf if I hadn't happened to have that contact with Miriam in various different ways. Though again, I don't know. But the kind of chance and the happenstance of it is all quite big and quite significant. There's lots of luck and lots of coincidences along the way. And also I was able to move to Germany because, like I said, we were in a position to, as a family, my wife studied German at university and was really excited about moving to Germany, and actually spent a year abroad in Aachen. So coming to NFA was particularly exciting for us. It felt super cool. So it was great to kind of come back, if you like, to this part of the world. Yeah, so that's how we ended up here, and then we came here before Brexit and before Trump, in that kind of and before COVID, in that far distant age. So like the longer we stayed here, the more impossible it feels to ever leave, because So it was very coincidental, and it was pure luck, but it's been perfect. So much. the biggest piece of advice is also the worst one, which is to be lucky, which is obviously not advice. It's not something you can do, but it's just recognizing that anybody with an academic job is lucky to have it. They got there by a sequence of coincidences. There are lots of other people who could do the job that I'm doing just as well, if not better than I can. There are lots of other people who are just as qualified, if not more qualified than I am to do my job, and that's the same for any academic job at all. So so everything else that I say now is qualified by that fact that it might just not happen, and it might just happen, and that's nothing to do with you. That's the way that the stars collide. That's really important to bear that in mind, because people can feel it's the worst thing. I've never been through it because I've been so lucky, but I see, particularly on social media, a lot of people going through the misery of sending off 30, 40, 50 job applications a year and getting nothing at all back. And there's nothing wrong with anything that they do. There might be amazing research and amazing teachers. They're just not lucky. So bear that in mind. Bearing that in mind, I think I would advise people, and I think this is quite unwelcome advice to quite a lot of people, and obviously it's just saying do what I did, but I would advise people to not go straight through BA, MA, PhD job, partly because I think that it's fast. It's an awful lot of thinking to do in a very short period of time. I did my PhD quite a lot quicker than most people do it. And I think that's partly because I was way older than most people are when they do their PhDs. And I spent a long time thinking about what I wanted to write about. So when I started doing my doctorate, I had those kind of thought patterns in mind. I'd done quite a lot of the reading. I kind of knew what was going on with it. And I knew that I was really excited about this particular subject. Whereas if you've kind of been shoved through a sequence of semesters where you've done nothing but research and be examined and research and be examined and research and be examined, you're not burnt out, but you are knackered. And you haven't had that time and that space to breathe. So I think taking some time out, it doesn't have to be as many years as I took out, and obviously it doesn't have to be in the same kind of way, but taking some time out at some point, I think really is very, very helpful. And that also helps to see other worlds, of work. So a lot of people are very unhappy in the academic world, in the academic professional world. And there are times when I'm quite unhappy with the academic professional world as well, but I've worked in teaching and hated it, and I've worked in theatre and hated it, and I've worked in museum education and hated it, and worked in international development and hated quite large parts of it. So whenever I hear complaints about academia, I can either like recognize them or not, but I can also kind of test myself, like, am I happier doing this kind of work or doing other kinds of work? Like what kind of professional field I'm in, because it's a profession as well as it's not a vocation, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. It's not a hobby, it is a profession. Like any other profession, there's a lot of bad things that go with that, but those bad things I think aren't unique to academia, and experiencing other professional worlds I think can be really helpful in terms of your confidence as a professional, but also in terms of what you are prepared to take and what you're not. I'm also very lucky in that I am white and male and English and straight and married and cis. I'm so straight down the like gun barrel normal for the academic community. So that makes it quite a lot easier as well. So that would also be my advice, I suppose. Another piece of useless advice alongside being lucky would be to be a straight white male, because that makes it a lot easier, which is obviously a really problematic thing. So recognizing that academia is as toxic and as problematic a work and a professional environment as many other professional environments, I think is also really important. Not to give into that or run away from it, but to recognize that it's problematic. More positive things that I would recommend are to work out to kind of give different strings to your bow, to find different things that you're good at and different things that you like, to work out whether you like teaching and want to do that kind of stuff. So I really love teaching. So I want to have a job in which I'm doing teaching. Other people really hate it and want to do a job where they're mostly doing research. And then there's lots of shades in between. So giving things a try and working out what you're good at and what you're bad at, and working out what you like and what you don't like, and recognizing that you can't do everything. There's lots of different types of academic career. So seeing what works for you. I would also recommend, though again, this is not what most people do, and I'm just here telling people to do what I've done because it's been lucky for me. I would also recommend doing different things. It's quite good to be like the standard academic model is to become the person who is known for doing X, because you did it for your BA thesis and you do it for your MA thesis and then you do it for your doctorate, and then everybody knows that you are the person who specializes in the sounds that birds make and how they're encoded in medieval Latin or something. So the great thing about that is that it's clear who you are and what your identity is, and everyone knows what they're getting with you. But the bad thing is that what if a job comes up that's got nothing to do with medieval Latin bird sounds? Suddenly you have to convince everybody that that's the kind of that you're, okay, you spent 25 years studying this, but now you could do a job doing this. And so I think getting more strings to your bow, whether those be languages or different literary fields, or studying things through theory or studying things through data analysis, like just playing with different things, and again kind of working out what works for you and what doesn't, matters. And then the two more things and I'll stop. One is to have an alternative, to have a backup. There's a very high rate of people not getting an academic career who deserve one because there aren't enough jobs, and that's not going to change. Like, obviously people like me would really like it to change, and would really like the medieval English department in Düsseldorf to have like 1 million people working for it and to have funding coming in from everywhere, but that's never ever going to happen, and no medieval department or any academic department anywhere is going to be like that. So that's just a fact of the field, of the kind of work. So knowing what you would do if you weren't an academic, I think, is really important and really useful. It's also useful because of those times when you think that being an academic is the worst thing, like those mornings when you wake up during your PhD and you think, oh my God, I can't face it. I can't face another bloody day in the library reading things I can't understand, or spending hours chasing a reference for footnotes. And then you can ask yourself, is this what I want to do? Because I've got an alternative, like I've got another option over there. Do I want to turn to that other option? And likewise, when you get the knockbacks in your academic career, recognizing that you can choose to do something else, I think is really productive, is really useful. And then the very last thing is to, at least early in your career, as in from BA stage up to the end of the doctorate, to say yes to absolutely everything, which can be quite bad for your workload and quite bad for your stress. So I'm not sure I'd recommend that if my wife were listening to me, but just saying yes to conferences, saying yes to contributing to edited volumes, saying yes to organizing things. Again, partly it's about having experience of these different things, like having a go at organising a conference to work out what that's like, having a go at editing, having a go at publishing in different forms, having a go at working with people, having a go at working alone, trying those different things out. But it's also about getting your profile built so that people can look at your CV and say, oh yeah, this is somebody who organises conferences and is active on social media and has published things in odd places, and oh, they write poems about medieval literature as well as studying things on it. Oh, they do a little bit of linguistics as well as a little bit of language. Like just showing that you've got those various different things and experiencing them for yourself is really, really useful. So my publishing CV looks far, for the career stage that I'm at, my publishing CV looks more impressive than it is, because there's lots of times when like a friend has been organising a little conference and said, could you give a paper at it because we're short of one? I said, yeah, sure, I'll say something. And you go along and you give a paper, and then 6 months later they say, actually, do you know what? I'm going to try to edit that into a collected volume. Would you like to write it up for that? You say, yeah, sure, give that a go. And then there's quite a lot of my early works, quite a lot of my early publications that I'm not very proud of as pieces of work. Like, I'd rather people didn't really read them now, because I feel like I've superseded them quite significantly. But I did them. I had a go, and I'm a better writer and researcher and editor and conference organizer now than I was then, because I tried doing all those different things. It's ideas. Yeah, and there's also a strong bias towards that. Like almost anybody with an academic career really wanted it from quite an early age, and so there's that kind of confirmation bias where you feel you have to say you're happy because this is what you always wanted. You don't want to betray your younger self. And also, there's lots of people who get rejected from it, so you feel like you have to say, oh, yeah, say you're happy. But things like social media are really good at helping people like me to recognize that a lot of people are very miserable in academia. A lot of people are doing it and really don't want to do it, and that's awful. That's a really, really grim thing. Not that it should be fun, because no job should be fun. Jobs are jobs. But like, some parts of it are always going to be crap, because some parts of any job are crap. But yeah, as you say, like preventing it being romanticized and this idyll of is really important, I think. Which is also part of professionalizing it, like moving away from that old white men who all went to the same school together, like sitting around puffing pipes and talking about books that they like. That's not the professional world of academia. That's not the world of careers. So kind of like professionalizing it and recognizing it as a profession, I think, is important.
I think we should end on something a bit more happy or positive. Maybe.
I have exactly my thought.
Oh, Beowulf is just extraordinary. Then there's a radio program in the UK called Desert Island Discs. I don't know if you've heard of it, where people get to talk about their favourite songs and other things, and eventually they get asked which book they would take to the desert island with them. And every so often, you kind of think about that as a thought experiment. What would I choose? There's lots of books that I love. I really love T.S. Eliot. He's my favourite modern poet. I really love Lord Byron. His work Don Juan is one of my favourite things ever, and I really love quite a lot of Shakespeare. So there's lots of things that I love and that I feel would be kind of more interesting choices. But ultimately, yeah, there's no question that if I spent the rest of my life reading one book, it would be Beowulf, no question, because it's just the best. It's extraordinary. It's the best because it's a simple story. Like the best stories are the straightforward ones. So at its heart, it's a story you want to tell, you want to hear. It's a story in which you can kind of dwell in each moment of it. Each kind of magical moment when at the beginning, when a little baby approaches in a boat the Danish shore and the people celebrate and he becomes king. It's a glorious folk tale. The moment when Grendel approaches Heorot and the men sleep inside it. It's magnificent. The moment when Queen Wealhtheow, Hrothgar's queen, walks into Heorot, regally dressed in her best garb, in this kind of great set piece of both heroism but also political management, and the kind of tension that thruns through that scene. Just dwelling in that moment, that instant, is incredible. Dwelling in the moment of Beowulf's death, or the moment when Wiglaf decides to charge down the hill and to protect Beowulf. So each like individual moment of it is so charged with energy, such a perfect little set piece, like a kind of vignette from a comic book. It's just perfect. So that's on a kind of fundamental storytelling level. It's awesome. There's also that part of me that is still the kind of, however old I was, 10, 11-year-old, who's obsessed with reading and rereading and rereading Tolkien and everything to do with him. So anything to do with dragons or monsters or heroes or swords just goes to that part of me that feels that is the kind of story I want to hear, the kind of story I want to read. So that bit of me is really excited by that kind of narrative. But I suppose more profoundly, more fundamentally, it's a really rich, provocative, wise, thoughtful poem. Every time I return to any bit of it, I get re-excited by the things that I knew that I loved, but I also learned so much more. When I think about the way in which the Beowulf poet, when I got interested in the philosophy of time, the way in which the Beowulf poet plays with time and moves through different times and experiments with how time works in loops, in fast and slow motion, the way that time kind of punctures itself, the way that present moments exist in the past and past moments exist in the present, and the future kind of looms over us all. Like his play with time is just extraordinary. When I get interested in gender and in the system of binaries that is being broken down or explored at the moment through gender conversations, when I look at Beowulf, I find exactly that same hierarchy, or that concept of binary and dualisms being interrogated and being broken down in that. When I'm interested in masculinity and what it is to be male, or what it is to be childless, or what it is to be successful, or what it is to grow older, I find the Beowulf poem exploring that. It's an extraordinarily rich and wise poem, I think. I also like that there are problems with it. There are things that one of the things that I think I probably always liked about the medieval is its otherness, is its distance from me. That's one of the appeals of the world that Tolkien created, is it's a world in which I cannot possibly exist. And the world of Beowulf is very much like that, both the world of the characters, which is obviously kind of characterized by its distance from us, but also the world of the poet. Like when the poet says, we all know this story. Well, I don't know this story. No one in the modern world knows that story. We don't know it anymore. When the poet talks about their Christianity, I personally don't share that. So that kind of distances me, that pushes me away from the poet as well. When the poet celebrates the violence and the kind of the savage building of an empire, I'm pushed away from that as well. So it doesn't stand in an easy relationship to me, which means that it's constantly exciting to me, it's constantly provocative to me. I feel constantly kind of confronted and challenged and thrilled by it. I feel like I can explore anything in it. And then lastly, the language of it is just glorious. There are many parts of other Old English poems that are wonderful. Obviously, there's some other good poetry written in other periods in English, but there are loads of other parts of Old English poetry that I encounter and think, oh, whoa, this is mind blowing. There's a little bit in a poem called The Phoenix that I read the other day and just thought, oh yeah, this is grippingly glorious. Maybe Beowulf isn't the best piece of Old English poetry, but then whenever you return to Beowulf, it's it's just perfect. The control over sound and rhythm, the control over pace, the way that the turn of a phrase, the turn of a word, the turn of a syllable can drumbeat you into something completely different. Or in a little half seconds, the poet can, again, just through sound and just through rhythm, take you into a completely different space. Here is a boat speeding through the air. Here is a boat crunching into the sand. Here are men clunking up a stone paved path. It's gloriously skillful and so real and so immediate and so concrete that it's just an endless joy to read. Yeah, it's the best. The manuscript also is brilliant. Yeah, I think that's the last thing. It's not the last thing. The other thing that's really great about Beowulf is its unknowability. So that thing that I like, that thing that really stimulates me, where I can't know, I can't get to it. It's something that always frustrates me. Beowulf only exists in one manuscript, which is way later than the poem was composed by, and it was written down by people who didn't understand quite a lot of what they were doing with the poem. So they are, in some senses, in the way they present it, they're working against the poet's own agenda. So that's really interesting. That kind of tension that's inherent in the moment of its kind of material being is fascinating and exciting, but also the problems that creates. There's so many bits of Beowulf where we don't know what the poet originally wrote. So which Beowulf are we talking about when we're talking about Beowulf? And it's an endlessly unknowable, challenging problem, which makes it just joyful and exciting, I think. Yeah, it's the best. It's the best possible thing.
Sing cucunu, sing cucunu, sing cucunu, sing cucunu. Summere secumene, sole sing cucunu. Sovet set and lovet men, and sing the vole nu. Sing cucunu, sava vedet af de landus af de kalde konu. Ullaks hjertet bukke vertet suri sing cucunu. Cucunu, singen cucune singunere o. Summere secumene, summere secumene, summere secumene,